repressive force of government is like tightening the mainspring of a watch. The more pressure you use to keep it under control, the more force it threatens to retaliate with when it inevitably slips free. This is the ignition source of all revolutions. A state becomes so powerful that its subjects, the very people whose passive acquiescence makes the protection of civil liberties possible, see their liberties pinched out one by one like candles until they're forced to fight the darkness itself. You can see a microcosm of the same concept play itself out between teenagers and their parents. As their worldview expands and their desire for various freedoms flourishes, the overprotective parent impedes their child and builds in them a form of resentment which, combined with the volatile chemistry of the rapidly changing ecosystem within, explodes outward into rejection and hostility. Of course, this isn't to say that the alternative should be neglect or submission. We've seen enough spoiled teens, narcissistic adults, and greedy organizations run roughshod over other people to know that a blind eye is not always a just one. There is more than just stop and go when it comes to the competing demands of different people. There is also yield, to give way so that you may follow through unobstructed. The mainspring trait in people demands the gentle way. Rather than meeting the strength of human nature with a clenched fist or a limp wrist, meet it with a firm guiding hand. We must comprehend the obstacle before us, understand how it operates, what causes its various behaviors, and in what way we can push or pull it to provoke them ourselves. In this way, we can deduce a method for directing their destructive energy towards constructive ends. If we can channel human nature away from the negative into something positive, then we need not wish it away, stamp it as evil, or devise convoluted political schemes for making it, and it will have achieved great dividends with a minimum of expenditure. The principle which refers to the maximization of utility at a minimum of costs is the principle of efficiency itself, and nothing short of efficiency can so efficiently summarize all the great advancements of civilization. Every industrial revolution is marked by the proliferation of some more efficient form of capital, and every great civic advancement is marked by a more efficient distribution of rights and liberties. Everywhere advantages outweigh the disadvantages, efficiency can be found. Whether it be out of narrow self-interest or broad magnanimity, civilization steadily lurches towards ever greater heights of efficiency. Cheaper smart devices, quicker court resolutions, renewable fuel, simpler taxes, all seek to bring to heel a good, and to either reduce its costs or raise its value. By good, here I mean any subject of perceived value. Even language, the vehicle by which any and all goods are expressed, is a good in and of itself, to be modified and refined over and over, like folding hot metal, until its potency as a tool meets the demands of its job. However inconsistently we apply the law of parsimony to alphabet syntax and pronunciation, it remains a fact that the global population has consolidated into major languages, expanded their lexicon, and simplified not only the words we use, but the order in which we use them and the characters we use to spell them. With this, we've simultaneously increased the repertoire ideas we can express, the ease with which we can express them, and the audience which could receive them. But communication concerns only the delivery mechanisms of such ideas. Its scope precludes ideas themselves, which are each a fresh good to be exchanged and valued subjectively in what we affectionately refer to as the marketplace of ideas. Here the utility of ideas are judged, shared, traded, and debated for a seemingly endless assortment of reasons. But regardless of the ends to which any idea would be the means, the idea itself might as well be worthless if it cannot be expressed clearly or concisely. Robert S. Hartman, in his book The Structure of Value, Foundations of Scientific Axiology, lamented on the challenges which beset common discourse, and proposed himself a simple axiom. The precision of any concept consists in the complete determination of its meaning in a minimum of terms. Herein we witness nothing short of an elegant appeal to efficiency, for an idea need not necessarily be simple, but were it expressed, there are more and less efficient ways of expressing it. Describing something in an excess of words opens the idea up to a greater range of possible interpretations, and misinterpretations, whereas a shorter definition utilizing words which consolidate the meaning of multiple words could convey the intended meaning of an idea with greater clarity in a shorter amount of time and with less effort, maximizing the value of an expression while also minimizing the cost or potential costs of expressing it. You could even say this concept is autological. What is this sentence if not a shorter and more precise version of what I've just now said? The sentence itself is a superb example of the axiom it describes. Much as I could expound on all that it implies, would it not be like tearing apart a neatly wrapped package and spilling its contents all over to be selectively separated and misconstrued in ways that would be inconceivable were it left intact? Would seem I've already made a mess. But as long as we've already dirtied our hands, let's take it one step further. While the principle of efficiency may suggest a method for communicating ideas by reference to their fundamental properties, this tells us nothing of whether a given idea is good or bad, true or false. Only a systematic pursuit of knowledge, science, could reliably unearth such mysteries, right? Here again, Hartman delivers a riposte with damning acuity. accounting with the minimum of concepts for the maximum of phenomena. This is all that is meant by science. Is this not true? Not only has Hartman employed the very axiom he's laid out for himself, but in so doing he struck straight at the heart of humanity's greatest enterprise. What indeed is science, if not exactly this? Do we not propose hypotheses in an attempt to explain a multitude of phenomenon? Do we not reform these hypotheses when they fail to account for all the phenomenon they're thought to explain? What are science's greatest achievements, if not the discovery of a few simple laws which lay bare countless mysteries that have plagued humanity since its rise from the primordial ooze? Occam's razor exists specifically because people are cognizant of this deep desire for simple answers to complex questions, which itself is yet another appeal to efficiency. As we've already inferred, the more complex a solution is to a given problem, the more ways it can possibly go wrong. A desktop computer eclipses the calculator in the number of problems it can solve, but so too does it eclipse the calculator in the number of problems it can produce. Time and again, we seek to pay a minimum of costs for a maximum of value, and while we readily apply this principle to theory crafting and problem solving in the manifold realms of science, what of politics? Nimble-witted listeners may have already divined where I'm going with this. I call your mind back to that so pronounced of recent books out of political philosophy, John Rawls' A Theory of Justice. Each person is to have an equal rights to the most extensive basic liberty, compatible with a similar liberty for others. This was Rawls' first principle of justice, and as he would go on to explain, the only reason for circumscribing basic liberties and making them less extensive is that otherwise they would interfere with one another. I defy you to avert your eyes and ignore the parallel. Here too, as though it never left, the principle of efficiency pulses loudly, commanding your attention. The competing demands of individual liberty and collective justice compel us to acknowledge it. If freedom is a good, and fairness is a good, and an excess of the first diminishes the second, then the solution admits of itself. Seek the maximum of liberties, at a minimum of injustices. Sweeping our laser focus across the entire political spectrum, we can arrive at the same conclusions which presented themselves earlier. Should we not revise an idea if it fails to account for all of what it's intended to account for? Should we not streamline legal machinery as we streamline literal machinery? Should we do with more things what can be done with fewer? The desire for minimal government, for compact and impactful legislation, for a constitution of precise and exacting language need not arise out of some ideological dogma, but out of a logical consideration for a simple principle which weaves its thread through the whole of society. Henry George too understood this well, and in his magnum opus Progress and Poverty, he pulled at the string which sets the top spinning. In describing political economy, he said, "The premises from which it makes its deductions are truths which have the highest sanction, axioms which we all recognize, upon which we safely base the reasoning and actions of everyday life, which may be reduced to the metaphysical expression of the physical law that motion seeks the line of least resistance, viz., that men seek to gratify their desire with the least exertion." Here is the linchpin around which the whole riddle rotates, our hypothesis, if you will, explaining the whole collage of related phenomenon we've catalogued up to now. It is not some elaborate conspiracy or system couched in vague premises, but a natural consequence born of the most elementary particles of animal intelligence. Where our energy is finite, and our time is finite, our options are finite, and so we find ourselves shackled in a world where every action or inaction imposes a tax on those most precious of resources. Why wouldn't we seek to postpone our deaths or optimize our lives? The woman who eats herself into an early grave and the man who makes a wise capital investment are equally beholden to, if not equally successful in, maximizing their desires and minimizing their costs. The desire to add to our advantages and subtract from our disadvantages is a value universally inherent to people, and it's the same universal value reverberating against itself which produces the mainspring effect I imparted to you earlier. When humanity coalesces around shared values, it's normal to prescribe governments as a means to protect them from rampant chaos. In theory, the state serves to safeguard or considerable benefit for a comparatively negligible cost. But when dispossessed of liberties and exposed to naked injustices, this equilibrium is broken, and humanity finds itself forced to conduct its own cost-benefit analysis on the state itself. If our desires can't be sated by obedient passivity, then we may be driven to resort to violent rebellion. This is the consequence of tightening the mainspring heedless of its nature. It will retaliate with a force proportional to the pressure placed upon it, a reaction, equal and opposite. Flags can change and desks can be rearranged, but the injustices will stay the same, at least until we learn to accept that part of ourselves which we so often reject. Meeting an obstacle not with apathy or attrition, but by adjusting so that its power may be leveraged and bent to your will, is what Jigoro Kano, the inventor of Judo, called the gentle way. Resisting a more powerful opponent will result in your defeat, whilst adjusting to and evading your opponent's attack will cause him to lose his balance. His power will be reduced, and you will defeat him. Had I greater strength than my opponents, I could of course have pushed him back, but even if I wished to push him back, I should first have left him unresisted, as by doing so I should greatly economize my energy. Kano called this the principle of maximum efficiency in use of mind and body. We don't yet know all of what the marketplace can achieve, but whether we're talking about an open market or an open forum, we consistently maximize humanity's productive power when we minimize government stranglehold on it. Rather than a zero-sum game between a majority of narrow interests and a minority of wide interests, limiting the purview of government to protecting only those values held most in common would inevitably result in the protection of all other possible values ensuing from them. And I know I'm beginning to sound like a broken record at this point, but here again, we see how we can accomplish more with less. And why shouldn't we? Language demands it, science demands it, logic demands it, justice demands it, human nature demands it, even full-contact martial arts demand it. You think the escapism of video games can save you? Welcome to min-maxing, where the rules are made up and the points don't matter. That's right, the points don't matter. Except vitality. Put all your points into vitality. Those points matter. And thus concludes my opening argument for a moral minarchy. In summary, I ask simply that we apply the same principle which we have long accepted as rational and intuitive in every other aspect of our lives. That from a minimum, we might bring forth the maximum. Once again, and as always, bring an open mind, and leave your taboos at the door, because nothing is immune to criticism. Question everything. And thank you very much for listening.
As you can see here, pulling back draws the opponent's center of gravity beyond the base of support. That's how it begins. That's the kuzushi phase. The smaller athlete then places her body under that center of gravity as she moves in quite low and deep.
There's a very good reason for getting below the opponent's center of gravity. Imagine the recipient of the throw is this stick. The red circle indicates the center of gravity. Suppose we try to turn the stick to produce a torque of 10 kg/meter. We'd have to apply a force of around 50 kilograms to push the stick at a point 2/10 of a meter below the center of gravity. But if we push the stick at 4/10 of a meter below the center of gravity, we'd only need half the force. In other words, applying force far away from the center of gravity produces much torque with minimal force. What that means for Judo is that by applying force at a point far below the opponent's center of gravity, a small judoka can throw a much larger person.
So once in position, the attacker simply has to stretch her knees to flip the bigger person over. Softness overcoming hardness has a scientific basis.